an achievement.
Well, is it not an achievement today?
Well, those days only 6 graduated, so...
It's still an achievement today, Prof.
Thank you, sir. So, I spent some time helping to set up the legal department of the prison service while I had enrolled at the school of Ghana School of Law. And the following year, the director had it converted to national service for me because those days our mates could do national service. And after prison service, I was not interested in enlisting because I had already decided to teach. So I went back to Legon as a teaching assistant and then got a scholarship to Yale University. And after my LLM, I came back home and I started teaching. And I rose through the ranks to become a full professor in 2002. In 2007, I was recruited into the UN as a Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General for Rule of Law in Liberia. I was there for 4 years on the rank of Assistant Secretary General. After 4 years, I had had enough, and my leave of absence had expired, so I had to decide whether to come back or to stay in the UN. I opted to come back home and continued my teaching. In 2012, I was appointed director of the Legon Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy. I was the director for 6 years. In 2015, I was appointed by the Secretary General of the UN to be part of a panel to examine the peacekeeping environment and make recommendations for the future, because it was clear that the environment was undergoing change and the UN had to adapt its ways. So after what is called the Hippo report, which is now the Bible, so to speak, of peace operations, no longer peacekeeping as we recommended. So that has been it, up and down, helping to train senior mission leaders for UN missions, helping to improve the quality of staff, particularly the police. So I've been part of the UN's police commanders course to expose police leaders at a certain level to the range of duties they have to undertake on peacekeeping. So, Mr. Chairman, in 2018, July 2018, I retired. I had attained 60 years on 29th October 2017, but the university has an arrangement not to disrupt the academic year. So everybody retires on 31st July of the following year. So those of us born after 31st July, nicknamed the Bubra crowd, or get some time more than our age mates born in the earlier part of the year. So I retired and I was given a post-retirement contract. And I'm back in the faculty, teaching, writing, researching, and that is what has brought me here today. Thank you.
Very well. Honorable Minority Leader.
Chairman, let me thank you for the opportunity and to join you in congratulating Professor Henrietta Mensah Bonsu. But Chairman, whilst doing so, I know that in her CV she asked me Banfo. Is the President aware of that name? Because a letter signed by him 18th May 2020. Do I take it that we go with the presence with Professor Henrietta J.A.N. Mensah Bonsu, or the Nibanful is part and parcel of your name?
No, sir. That is the common way of referring to your maiden name after you have changed. I've been married 40 years.
Chairman, the second page, I know that she attended that's a famous Wiggy Hill or Wesley Girls. They are remembered for something. You want to share that with us? What are they remembered for? Their motto. I see a lot of young people want to speak with it with pride. You want to share it with the committee?
The school motto?
Yes.
Live pure, speak true, right, wrong, follow the king.
How has that guided your life as an academic?
Mr. Chairman, when you are brought up to speak true, then you know that not seeing the truth and walking by it is not an option. And so in our school in those days, being described as dishonest because you had told a lie was equivalent to a capital punishment. And you were supposed to live pure. They were raising us as Christian young women, and we were supposed to show by example the faith that we believed in. You were supposed to right wrong, because if anything wrong is going on and you are aware of it, you are supposed not just to look on it, but to take steps to correct it.
Chairman, that leads me to my next question. Do you see any wrongs? Do you see any wrongs in the 1992 Constitution that you want to right by the Wiggy motto? Right some wrongs. Are there wrongs in the 1992 Constitution, which will be your Bible and living document as you go to the high office of Supreme Court, that you want to write any provision?
Mr. Chairman, the Constitutional Review Committee did an excellent job going through it, but much of the time they said the provisions should remain. I share that position because a constitution is not something that you change every day when you find something inconvenient. What you do is to work around it and let it shape your life rather than the other way around, because otherwise then it ceases to be the basic law. So maybe it could be improved in some ways. Already it has undergone some amendment on citizenship and so on. But speaking for myself, I would like to see it work more before we touch it.
Now you've just mentioned citizenship. Under the Citizenship Act, what is the basis of establishing that one is a citizen of Ghana?
You're born in Ghana or born elsewhere with at least a grandparent as a Ghanaian would be sufficient.
Is a birth certificate or a baptismal certificate a relevant document for that purpose?
A birth certificate generally testifies to the citizenship of the country that owns you. And it's for that reason that a foundling is deemed to be Ghanaian and definitely would be given a Ghanaian birth certificate, even though there's no evidence of the person's birth.
Chairman, thank you. I know that the nominee has very rich background and has contributed enormously to Ghana's criminal jurisprudence, no doubt about that. Ghana Prison Service. What do you want to see change about the institution and the inmates of prisons in Ghana, given your experience?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Prisons, always a big issue. Sometimes we don't want to confront the fact that as human, having set standards of behavior, some will fall short, and we would have to take them in hand to bring them in line. So nobody wants to build prisons. That was my experience as Deputy Special Representative in Liberia, that building prisons was a big deal. No donor wanted to go home and report that they built prisons. They would rather go home and report that they built schools or hospitals. So it's the same for governments. And yet, like coffins, somebody has to be a coffin maker, or else how are you going to bury people? So we need to build more prisons. We definitely do. And then we need to have fewer custodial sentences. And I would crave the indulgence of the honorable members to urge you to pass fewer legislation that require custodial sentences. Now, this means that we have to work on the alternative sentences, community service. It's always a touchy issue, believe it or not, because when a crime is committed, there are various interests, and people don't want to think that people who have hurt them have got off lightly. And yet, we cannot keep this on. Once on a trip to Nsawam prison, a busload of prisoners came from the courts. They were all young men, between the ages of 18 and 25. And I said, this is the flower of Ghana youth. After they've spent so long here, they'll be of no more use to us. So we really need to look at our sentencing also so that we can decongest the prisons. But definitely there are some people who belong there. And we can adopt however enlightened regimes we want, but some would need handling.
Chair, thank you very much. Prof, criminal reforms to improve the administration of justice, what will be your take? What can we do? The slow, tortuous, cumbersome trial process, justice delayed, they say is justice denied. What will you see change in our criminal administration system?
Thank you very much. Sometimes some of the delay is built in, and some you'd say quote and unquote man-made. Because when people have confronted the state and are in trouble with the state, you want to make sure that they've had every chance to make their case. We have a presumption of innocence. So you cannot hurry the matter until you have brought it to a conclusion. Perhaps we could do more plea bargaining. I hesitate in using the word because in America, where it's very popular, it's also very touchy because people think that the whole process of criminal justice should not be treated like a market transaction. And yet, if you don't adopt some of those mechanisms, everybody will end up in prison. And for what end? Then there's the possibility of paying money, particularly for crimes of embezzlement and so on, when the state's interest is involved. It's a good way. At the same time, we have to be mindful of the image of the system as serving rich people, big people better, so they don't get to go to prison because they can pay, and so on. All the same, these things can be managed so that we have fewer sentences to prison, and we can hurry the system so that there are no unreasonable delays as the Constitution takes. Even the Constitution recognizes that sometimes there will be delay. That's why it qualifies it with unreasonable delays. Then there are the juvenile side. Mr. Chairman, juvenile justice is very much on my heart because the young people need a chance to get their lives back. At the same time, when they've broken the law, somebody must take them in hand and work on them. And I think we could use another look or tweaking of the system so that we don't send too many young children. For example, the last time I did research at the senior correctional home in Admamobi, there were a number of young boys there on defilement charges. Now, some of these would not have ended in prison, but for the fact that under our law, there's no opportunity for what they call Romeo and Juliet statutes. So, however young the boy is, if the girl is below a certain age, then he gets into the criminal justice system. maybe we need to tweak some of those things too. Thank you.
Chairman, I note that the nominee who has been at the Supreme Court will be part of the law lords who would exercise...
Sorry, sir. They say they can't hear me.
Prof, are you okay?
I am, sir. Thank you. They said they couldn't hear me, sir.
I wish I could share how uncomfortable or discomforting it is to have this COVID. Where are you from? Chairman, the nominee will join respected Superior Court judges at the highest court of our land, and you will be exercising appellate, supervisory, and exclusively the interpretation role of the Supreme Court. Criminal matters will be referred to you at the highest court. Elucidate on it. Why in Ghana, why is the burden of proof based on proof beyond reasonable doubt and not proof beyond shadow of doubt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The burden of proof is proof beyond reasonable doubt, because otherwise you would not be able to prove anything. Proof beyond the shadow of a doubt is a level of certainty, a degree of certainty, which will be difficult to establish. I believe that proof beyond reasonable doubt is a fair standard for both parties. After all, in civil cases, we only need a balance of probabilities. So when you are proving beyond reasonable doubt, you are at least making sure that the penalties that will be imposed have been earned. In the criminal justice arena, we have all kinds of interests. It's not just the victim and the perpetrator. It's the state, it's the public. Indeed, Mr. Chairman, when you hear that a particularly heinous crime has been committed in Azerbaijan, you can get upset in your home. So there are all these interests, and yet people must not be punished until it has been shown that they have earned it. So I believe that it would be an unreasonable burden on the prosecution to insist that there should be proof beyond a shadow of a doubt. Coupled with this proof beyond reasonable doubt is also the presumption that when there's doubt, it must be resolved in favor of the accused. I think between the two, a fair job can be done.
Chairman, may I now, if the nominee has a copy of the Constitution, should Parliament approve of your nomination, you would subscribe to what is referred to as the judicial oath. And I'm just paraphrasing part of it. And with Chairman's permission, I quote, "I will truly and faithfully perform the functions of my office without fear or favor, affection or ill will, and that I will at all times uphold, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and the laws of the Republic of Ghana." How do you intend to cruise with these words as a justice of the Superior Court of Ghana?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Generally speaking, I am a very fair-minded person. I keep an open mind about people, and I'm broad-minded enough to accept new ideas if it turns out that the ideas are worth accepting. When you are dealing with justice, the people in your hands are vulnerable, and so you must understand that they are individuals facing the might of the state. And therefore, you should not take out any personal feelings that would prejudice their case. You have to be clinical about it, and that is what we try to teach students every day, that the law, in applying the law, you cannot form an emotional bond and do the wrong thing. You have to be clinical about it. And so without fear or favor, affection or ill will, I interpret to be as clinical about it as possible, so that your personal feelings don't intrude. You have not been hired to perform those personal things. You are working on behalf of a people, on behalf of the state, and that is what should happen. Thank you.
Chairman, may I refer the nominee to Article 122 of the 1992 Constitution, and probably just to learn from her, criminal contempt, and Parliament wanting to exercise under contempt of Parliament, educate us on it. When Parliament says that it wants to charge somebody for contempt, related to contempt within the practice within the judicial system of Ghana, and then just make a comment on Article 122, contempt of Parliament. What can Parliament do and not do relative to contempt?
Thank you very much. The institutions of state have to be protected against conduct that undermines their standing, because they exist for the general good. It is a subversion of the general good when the institutions are attacked such that their purpose and worth and so on are undermined. The same goes for Parliament as for the courts, because for many people, the courts remain the last hope. And it is not good if people undermine the efficacy of the judicial system and so on. Then what are you leaving them with but self-help, which nobody wants? I know that Parliament has this opportunity, but Article 1253 also talks about the judicial power vesting in the judiciary. And so any exercise of power that amounts to judicial power may be crossing the separation of powers line.
Chairman, thank you very much. I note again that the nominee has some writings. Ghana Police Service. Assuming, Prof, you were just driving from Legon towards where you used to head Lesia, the Center for International Affairs, and out on the street heading towards Medina, you saw an MTTU policeman slap a trotro driver and want to pull him out of the car. What would be your first sense with your respect for criminal law in Ghana, your intuitive sense?
Mr. Chairman, people don't lose their rights because they have offended. Indeed, the fair trial provisions in the Constitution arise only when you have broken the law. So, is slapping a trotro driver part of the work of a police officer? A police officer who is enforcing law and is doing so by means that the law does not support has to pay a price for it. They know the ways in which they can do their work. They know the powers of arrest they have. None of those would permit that kind of slapping. So the law gives you a chance with all kinds of powers to be able to do your work. But when you exceed those powers, then you must be taken to task. I would not confront an angry policeman and get a slap and apology later, but I would definitely contact somebody in the police hierarchy and make a complaint.
Thank you very much, Prof. Article 127, within the context of the principle of separation of powers, we have the three co-equal arms of government. Do you conceive of the judiciary of Ghana as financially independent and autonomous within the meaning of Article 1271 of the Constitution? You may refer to it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's always a thorny issue when the resources of the country are controlled by the executive, and the legislature has the power of the purse, and the judiciary needs money to function. But I think there's a reasonable control to enable the judiciary to, by and large, stay independent. No money can be spent without Parliament's approval. So that in itself operates as a check on the executive. Because let's face it, somebody has to take charge of the resources and allocate. So it's always a problem of the executive taking the estimates and working with them and so on. And yet it's the one who shares what's in the pot who really has to know what is needed. In Liberia, for example, the judiciary makes a direct application to Parliament. Even though Parliament controls the power of the purse, let's say that the purse is in the pocket of the executive and Parliament controls the power to open it. So whatever happens, somebody would control the expenditure. But even the principle of separation of powers does not talk of such total and unrelated separation. They say they are separate but equal, separate but interdependent. So it's unavoidable that the one who controls the purse strings can exercise some control. But fortunately, the executive doesn't do both. So the three arms have to cooperate so that the protection that the Constitution offers the judiciary through the legislature would be actualized.
Yes, Honorable Minister for Works and Housing.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm also gladdened that one of my lecturers is being elevated, maybe probably in the evening of her years to sit in the Supreme Court. She always wore a smile when she was lecturing. And I'm grateful to her for contributing to my education, and now I sit as a lawyer. Thank you, Madam. I'll just ask one question from your CV, and I'll ask a couple of questions, and then I'll be done. You said you have 3 children. May I know whether you were blessed with a child who had your intellectual bent?
Mr. Chairman, I'm more than blessed. My 3 daughters, 2 of whom are here. The third one could not be here because she has an online meeting with her university. She's reading for her PhD at Oxford.
Oh.
And she has a meeting with the university today, so she could not be here.
Yes.
But the 3 of them are doing very well. 2 are lawyers, beginning to make waves themselves. The eldest is the managing director of the family company. She is the one responsible for the National Science and Maths quiz. And I believe all of you know the waves she's been making in education. So I will say that the grace of God has abounded.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, my substantive questions. There is a rule of evidence that he who alleges must prove, and the burden of proof can change. In the presidential election petition, it was the Electoral Commissioner, Dr. Farijan, who declared President Mahama, based on the constitutional arithmetic, that he had 50 plus 1 of the votes cast, and ergo the president-elect of the Republic of Ghana. Some jurists believe that the burden of proof should have been on Dr. Farijan, the declarant of the results, who should have proved to the Supreme Court how he arrived at 50 plus 1. And this would have curtailed 8 months of laborious trial. What is your view on the burden of proof, the presidential election petition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I understand why you would take that position, some things are easier to prove than others. And a person who is alleging that his rights have been infringed is the one who has to show how the right has been infringed. And then the processes can continue. If you reverse the burden, then anybody, I'm not just thinking of the presidential petition, but anybody can make an allegation and then call upon you to prove. That is why even in the law of torts, the evidentiary rule about the case speaking for itself, res ipsa loquitur, is an exception to the rule. So maybe with more experience, we should be able to determine that in such a situation, it's a res ipsa situation. But if you had no basis for complaining about the computation, you wouldn't have gone to court. So surely there's nothing wrong with you being called upon to prove how you came by that position, so that the person against whom you are alleging improper conduct or indolence or dishonesty would then have a chance to answer. So I can understand why you would say that, but I think all things considered, we are better off leaving things as they are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, I asked a very interesting question on the review jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. And I think being a lecturer and with a very elastic mind, I might want to ask this question again, because I have a view different from the answer I got. Relating to the review jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, it is the position of some jurists that the 7 judges who will sit on the case should not include the original 5 justices who dealt with the case at the first instance. The reason is that the 5 justices who originally sat on the case always take the position that we have made up our minds. Don't disturb us with the facts. Do you share this view that the 7 new justices should review the case? And if not, why not?
It is not, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not a pseudo-appellate jurisdiction. And for that reason, it must be protected. It is a good mechanism to get them to take another look. And the practice has been to add people who were not originally part of the panel. You cannot assume that those who first heard the case were in the wrong, and that a completely different panel would judge differently. We have to have some assurance that when the Supreme Court has given a decision, it is final. So yes, there is the power of review. Yes, you can ask for a review, but the process cannot go on endlessly.
My final question, Mr. Chairman. Prof, do you consider the Constitution as a political document, which will mean that where you are going to sit and remain there for about some 7 years, you'll be handing down decisions of serious political ramifications?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To the extent that the constitutional provisions have been negotiated, they represent a political negotiation of what the rules going forward should be. In life, everything is political, even what you hand your children to eat. It is partisan politics that we usually take issue with. But the essence of having a constitution is that it better guarantees the right of the individual as the different organs of government stay within the space that they've been allocated, and so the individual is the better off for it. It sets out how we may do things, how we may not do things, what our entitlements are. It guarantees our rights. It doesn't even grant them, because rights, we say, precede, are inherent in being human. So it is a political document. You can't get away from that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity. Let me join colleagues in congratulating Professor Henrietta Mensah Bonsu. Congratulations, madam. First of all, I want to find out from you if you, I'm sure you have publications before the nomination of Madam Jane Mensah to become the Electoral Commissioner suggested that you were considered for that post. Have you ever been approached for the post of Electoral Commissioner by anyone close to the appointing authority or the appointing authorities themselves?
Mr. Chairman, this was a very difficult time for me. Nobody had approached me for anything. And yet I kept seeing headlines. Somebody even had a headline explaining why I turned it down. And it was a very difficult time for me. People were saying, hold a press conference. And I said, what are you going to deny? Nobody has offered you anything. What are you going to deny? So let's just say that I won the popular vote. Thank you.
Would you have accepted it, though, if you were contacted?
I may disagree with the honorable member, because that is a position at the level of Court of Appeal. And I believe that with my track record, I ought to move and aspire higher. Thank you.
Now, I want to find out what your position is on sexuality, sexual abuse, and the desire by some people for sex education to be promoted, especially at the basic level.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure you can see that I have a publication on, sexual offenses, and this, which I describe as sexual self-expression, because sexual self-expression is one of the things that that are normal to the human being, and yet expressed a certain way becomes criminal. So I look at all of those things. It's a part of life, but unfortunately we are changing. And so we must do things differently. In our day, our parents did not give us much sex education. But in this day, with all the technology, all the media information and so on, you endanger a child's life if you do not direct the child as to the correct things to do. I know that it is the work of parents, but if parents neglect that, guess where the children learn it from? From their peers, not from school. So it is important that children be exposed to these matters. After all, their sexual organs are part of their body, and they are bound to ask questions about them. If they don't ask the parent, then they are asking somebody who will give the wrong answer. So I think parents should step up to the plate, so that if whatever is offered in school would be in addition to what the parents have taught them, because there are issues of morality as well, and you cannot leave your children to be guided by somebody else's morals.
I was hoping that your answer will not be directed to the domestic, but because of the publication that I have come across, you will situate the answer within the context of our laws and perhaps how we can ensure a balance between the need, for example, to punish sexual abuse and also not to expose our children or our society that much to sexuality, even as we desire or hope to get our young ones sexually aware of who they are and what they can do.
Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, there are sexual predators, and there's nothing you can do about that. And sexual predators tend to reoffend. It is one of those recidivist crimes. People don't change. And so you must protect the young ones. And a lot of the time, they manage to get their victims not to complain and so on, with threats of you will die and so on. If you have given your child the necessary exposure and education, they will know that they won't die, that somebody is abusing their innocence. In my article, I talk about even our housing arrangements. It was common when I was growing up that in a household and in a compound house, if a young bachelor came to stay in the house, it was common for a parent to assign one of the daughters to help this person fetch water and do the kinds of things that in those households women do, so that they would support this young man. Often this young man would be a teacher who had come into the village or something like that. It was done. But look what has happened now. Again, in our traditional setup, our roles are very gendered. Men deal with men, women deal with women. Then we move to the city when those things don't happen anymore. Then you have serious situations that you must deal with. Then you have the law presuming that parents are the best protectors of the children. And yet, in this day and age, we hear of fathers who abuse their own daughters, sometimes even to the extent of not wanting to pay their school fees unless they allow them to abuse them. Things have changed, unfortunately.
Prof, some mothers are now offering to marry their sons. So it's not one way. The abuse of children. Some mothers are offering to marry their sons.
As I said, the world has changed.
Chama, is this in Ghana?
In Uganda.
Okay, not Ghana. Prof.
All right. Prof, let me, I listened to you on a radio station once, and it was a personality profile interview, and you said something that touched me. It had to do with your choice to abandon law practice so you could take care of your children and your home and be a good wife, as you put it. Now, there seemed to be a certain misconception about feminism and what it seeks to do for women. In the context of the affirmative action bill, which I know many people, including yourself, had advocated for its passage, how do you think, women, or if you like, the female gender in our society will be protected as they are faced by these choices every day?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me take the opportunity to correct an impression. What I said, or what I intended to say, if what I said did not go down well, was that here was I copying other people. And that I learned from that you must never do things because other people are doing them. That you must make sure that your own circumstances enable you to do those things. I had taken a decision to teach, and that requires your full-time attention. So doing other things really should not have been part of the equation. But I just went along because that's how my male colleagues are doing, until I had a little domestic crisis. Then I realized that, as our people say, if you don't use both eyes to look into a bottle. And I had to make a choice. So it is, the point I was trying to make was that you should not let other people lead your choices. You know your situation, you know your priorities, and that's what you should do, and not copy other people, because their circumstances may be different. That's the point I tried to make. So let me get to the point that you made. You see, when you talk of affirmative action, you are seeking to correct a historical injustice. If women are going to be able to compete in the same way, then some things have to happen. Yes, we think that taking care of babies belongs to the women. Really? When the baby has two parents? So it should be possible for us to have arrangements that enable both parents to play their role. We have inherited images from our mothers and grandmothers who were stay-at-home wives. There's a whole lot they can do that somebody like me having to report to class to teach will not be available to do. And the system must support young women to be able to do these things. After all, the children are the next generation of citizens, aren't they? And so why should it be just the burden of the woman and not the burden of society? So you are just trying to give people a leg up so that they will be able to carry on from there. Sometimes some decisions are made and you know that this decision was made by a man.
How is that?
Somebody, not too long ago, somebody was doing online training for something. And the person was doing it at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Excuse me, real mothers have things to do on Sunday mornings. Or people who, ministers and so on, who drag services well into the afternoon. Children have to eat. So your young mothers are disadvantaged. It's those kinds of things that we have to be aware of, that some things sound ordinary because our circumstances are different. But when you pitch it against what some people have to do, then you find that it's inequitable.
Right. Thank you. Let's move away from there and look at another national assignment that you were called upon to perform recently, the Ayawaso West Wagon by-elections and the attendant violence that we witnessed. Your report was highly commended by many institutions and many well-meaning Ghanaians. And I also will want to say that it was a good job by, what I was able to go through. But the government white paper and the implementation of some of your recommendations seem to have watered down perhaps what your far-reaching recommendations intended to achieve. Will you say it's an anticlimax, or it's a disappointment for you, given the effort you may have put into your work as members of the commission?
When you serve on a commission to advise the president, you are guided by law. The rules say that when you hand in your report, you are functus officio. So it's not your duty to go chasing people to implement. It becomes property that honorable members like you should follow up, not the commission. The commission doesn't exist anymore. It is functus officio. And when, for example, judges take decisions in the courts, the judge may have really sweated over the decision. It goes on appeal and it is reversed. The judge doesn't hold a press conference to complain. That's the nature of it.
Would you have wished personally for better?
Well, when you give advice, you hope that it will be taken. But what I know of advice is that those who want it don't need it, and those who need it don't want it.
That's interesting. Maybe if I still have time, I also noticed that you were nominated by Ghana and supported even by ECOWAS for the Judge A list of the International Criminal Court. Unfortunately, the vote didn't go your way. Have you always wanted this, to be a judge?
Let's say that even at the beginning, I had two choices, to teach or to join the bench. Teaching was my first choice, and joining the bench, my next choice. So once I worked my way up.
Is it her post-retirement choice? Post-retirement choice to the bench. Haven't lectured sufficiently. Is that a passing comment, Chairman?
Thank you very much for not needing a response. So, having worked my way up to the point where that transition has become possible, I did not resist the temptation to, it was a request by the government of Ghana that I represent Ghana, and that is why I went to all that trouble.
A final one. Article 128(4) of the 1992 Constitution states, and with the permission of Chairman, I quote, "A person shall not be qualified for appointment as a justice of the Supreme Court unless he is of high moral character and proven integrity and is of not less than 15 years standing as a lawyer." Mr. Chairman, what will you say is the correct assessment of high moral character and proven integrity?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking for myself, I've lived my life in the very eye of the public, because when you teach, you are very much a focus of attention all the time. And if after 30-something years, there's been no adverse complaint, you have not taken any step that you should not have taken, there are no moral question marks about you, I suspect that will qualify as proven integrity.
Well, I didn't intend to make the question specific, but you made it specific to yourself. So what about those who haven't had the privilege of perhaps working in the sector that you work in? What will be your fair assessment? In your view, what will be the fair assessment of what moral character, high moral character and proven integrity is?
Perhaps you need indicators that people must conform to. Otherwise, you leave it as opinions that people have. Unless you can prove that the person has taken some wrong step that has been the subject of a record or some official censure. It's really at the level of opinion. So maybe, since you are very interested, Honorable Member, you can initiate some discussion so indicators are developed for the future, so you can be more sure that people have met this standard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Barbara.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and congratulations, Professor Harriet Mensah Bonsu. I just received a text message from some old girls congratulating you for your good work. Yes, and a lot of young people, especially women, look up to you. Thanks for your mentorship and leadership. Lecturing law is not equal to sitting as a judge who determines complex and difficult cases. How will your career as a professor of law help you discharge your duty as a judge of the highest court of the land? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. At the highest court of the land, the work is essentially assessing evidence, taking evidence, assessing evidence, depending upon which of the jurisdictions one is exercising, but mostly assessing evidence, making up your minds with the applicable law, writing judgments. And these are the things that I teach students every day. Not to mention the fact that I have chaired quite a number of quasi-judicial bodies on campus and elsewhere. So I know that it's different, but it's the other side of the same coin.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Some people believe that in the name of impartiality in relation to which judges sit on which case, some people believe that in the name of impartiality in relation to which judges sit on which case, the process of empaneling should be automated and devoid of determination by the office of the Chief Justice. Do you share this view? And is it consistent with the constitutional position under Article 1254, which makes the Chief Justice the head of the judiciary regarding administration, adjudication, and supervision? Thank you.
Let me say that I know that some things have gone on in the past which have got some mechanisms put in place to, in a sense, take out the Chief Justice's discretion. But we've got to trust somebody sometime. We give somebody a responsibility. There are many people around with different backgrounds. Why do you want to automate? With the kind of background I have in peacekeeping, if there's a case that involves an understanding of peacekeeping, why would you leave it to a machine to take a decision as to who sits on it? So I think there's a certain level of distrust inherent in automate, but it's not for the general good that we should leave such decisions to a machine.
Thank you very much. This is quite personal, but you are very special. I mean, being a woman, looking at your achievement, very successful woman who has kept the family, and looking at your CV, you have achieved so much. Can you share with us one or two of what you've been able to, your secrets over the period? How you've been able to succeed as a woman, a family person, with a successful career?
Thank you for the compliments, Honorable Member. Let me just say at the outset that I have a wonderful husband. And
he's from the choir, isn't he?
So we've been supportive of each other's hopes and aspirations. Without that kind of support, it's very difficult. Because there have been times when I've had to travel for a period of time, and he's had to, look after the children. And for me, the bonus for that kind of situation is that his daughters have a direct relationship with him. A situation in many homes where they deal with their father through their mother. I stay out of the way and they deal with their father. So without that kind of support and an understanding that your happiness is my happiness is your happiness, it won't work.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair.
Very much.
Thank you, Prof.
Yes,
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairman. Chairman, permit me to also express my very deep honor in being part of this engagement with someone who is a true legal luminary in her own right. In Ghana, often the terminology is abused, but this is an engagement with a true luminary, and we really are honored to engage with you. I congratulate you most sincerely, and we wish you well when you assume that onerous duty as a judge at the Apex Court. I want to begin from your CV. I must indicate that you presented to us a very intimidating CV, the most voluminous we have worked with since I joined this committee, and it's been very refreshing going through. Just a few matters of interest. Page 7 of the CV, I noticed that under social, just above the membership of professional bodies, I noticed that you provide the year for all your social positions. The past president of Accra Bonny Lions Club, 1998, past zone chairman, zone 161, that's 2002. But for the past vice president of Wesley Girls High School, you don't provide the year. Are you please able to help us with that?
Thank you, sir. I just couldn't remember the years. I can check, but I find that some of the dates and things I did not note earlier. By the time I came back from Liberia, I had forgotten even some of the clothes I owned. So I've never really checked, but if you are interested in me providing those years, there are people I can check from.
Chairman, noted. The Honorable Minister for Local Government says she remembers the year she was Vice President. And membership of professional bodies. I also note that for the two listed above the Council of Foreign Relations, you do not provide a year, fellow Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, Ghana Bar Association, but for member Council of Foreign Relations, you have in bracket 2019. Just for clarity, were you just a member for 2019, or are you still a member of the Council for Foreign Relations? Let me indicate that I was honored to be at the inauguration of the council. It's a very worthy effort. Ghana has lacked this forever, since the coming into being of this country. And I commend you for this effort. But the way it's been put here, have you left the council, or are you still a member of the council?
Thank you very much. Maybe it's because it's so recent that I put the 2019 there. I'm still there. I had indicated that the responsibility seemed to be more onerous than I could undertake, given my many other undertakings, and I was assured that I might be able to move to a different category. So maybe that's why I did not add more than that.
Finally, on the CV, it's a lighter matter. On page 23, under hobbies, after more than 10 books you have authored, more than 30 journal articles, and so many other chapter contributions of books, over 40, you list as your hobby reading. There must be something else to you. It appears that it's all reading and writing. I don't know if Chairman will accept this hobby, but don't you have another life apart from reading?
Mr. Chairman, cookery used to be my hobby, and devising new recipes and so on used to be my hobby. But when the children grew up and there was nobody to eat when you cooked it, I stopped and gave that up. So it is only in reference to the true situation that now all I do is watch Food Network if I have time to see the competitions and the recipes. I once had a dream that I would own a Ghanaian restaurant, but I think it will remain a dream.
Very interesting.
How lonely it is to grow up, isn't it? I said, very lonely when you grow up, isn't it?
Well, growing old is lonely. But fortunately, I had guidance from my mother that it is lonely, so expect it. So you develop new hobbies, you gain other interests. I listen to the radio a lot. I read for pleasure. And I'm okay. When you have done your work well, your grandchildren live with their parents, you see.
So, Prof, do you have room, do you make time for mentorship of young ladies who are not your students?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. A number of young women have decided to attach themselves to me. I'm quite happy to mentor them, but they also must make their own way. You cannot be a second edition of somebody else. And you cannot feel that you have not been successful because you are not just like X. You don't have to be. So giving them confidence to make their own way, absolutely. But they have to seek you out.
Mr. Chairman, I want to now come to the substantive questions for the distinguished professor. I intend to begin with your work serving on the Commission of Inquiry into the Ayawaso West Wuogon events. I hold in my hands the white paper, which was gazetted by government on the 13th of September 2019 and signed by the learned Attorney General. On page 5 of the white paper, the government wrote, and I quote, "The fundamental response of government to the findings of the report is that the report failed to address the first and most critical of the terms of reference of the commission, which was, quote, to make a full, faithful, and impartial inquiry into the circumstances of and establish the facts leading to the events and associated violence that occurred during the Ayawaso West Wuogon by-election on the 31st day of January 2019, unquote. The failure to do so disables government from accepting in whole the findings of the commission, unquote. Have you reflected on this position taken by government? And you're going to the Supreme Court, people, these are now academics, researchers will be looking at your work and what government response has been. Does this in any way take something away from your capacity? Do you think this was an indictment on the work of the Commission?
Not at all, Mr. Chairman. It is customary when people draft appeals to say that the judgment is against the weight of the evidence. So I do not see it except in that light. And enough of the recommendations were accepted for that not to be wholly correct. So yes, the language may have been infelicitous, but the Constitution uses that language. So anybody who wants to question something would be right to use that language, but I don't think it questions our competence in any way, no.
I noticed from my copy of the report as published on the 14th of March that your commission chose to refer to what is popularly called vigilante groups as party-associated militia. On page 15 of the report. Are you able to elucidate on why you chose to refer to these groups as party-associated militia, which, by the way, government did not agree with you on?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we thought that the manifestations of the phenomenon as is occurring in this country is less deserving of a euphemism like vigilante. But now that there's a Vigilante Act, the state has made a choice as to how those kinds of activities will be considered. And so that is how we will refer to them. But we did think that there were manifestations that needed to be categorized that way, yes.
At page 22 of the government white paper, there's a matter which generated considerable controversy. Many people even refer to you as the authority that we should all go for your books and lesson notes, that it would not align with this particular position. I read item number 6.3b, quote, the government does not accept the Commission's recommendation that Muhammad Suleimana must be prosecuted for the offense of assault, to wit, the slapping of the Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Samuel Nate George, on the basis that the Commission, at paragraphs 6.1 and 6.2 on page 55 of the report, accepted the facts which led to the said assault on the Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Samuel Nate George, which facts support a valid defense of provocation for the assault. Provocation for the assault. Your views, respected Professor.
I believe I can deliver a lecture or two to straighten that out.
So, in other words, the learned Attorney General got it wrong for records. Is that what you're
saying? Maybe they are contemplating making it applicable. I myself have written, not published yet, but I've written on why I think it is inequitable to limit the defense only to when death has been caused. So who knows?
Mr. Professor, I want to now come to a matter I've made my habit since we started these hearings in these COVID-19 times, COVID-19 and the law. The United Nations has been concerned that governments may use the need to impose emergency measures to, as it were, encroach personal liberties, violate human rights, and what have you. And indeed, the European Council has also issued some guidelines to guide governments in the European Union. In Ghana, there has been some criticism of EI 63, which, in the name of contact tracing, government can demand from the telcos. It will be legal for the telcos to provide information on mobile money transactions, bank details, your contact details, and all of that. It's being referred to as the spy EI. A lawyer, Samson Ladia Yenini, has written extensively on the matter, and I've read his rather lucid articles on this issue. There are some other human rights lawyers who have taken issue with that EI. Have you averted your mind to that EI, and what views do you have to share about maintaining the public health, but also guarding against an erosion of rights?
Mr. Chairman, these are difficult times. The state has police powers, and when there's a public health emergency, some of those powers can be invoked for our protection. Now, the problem with this COVID situation is that we don't know from day to day what is going to happen. We don't know enough about this virus. We are all terrified. That's why we are all now highwaymen or practicing to be. We are all terrified. And in what I call the panicdemic, we are responding more out of panic because we don't know. And fear is produced by fear of the unknown. Is a very dangerous virus in itself. What I think the situation is having to balance what needs to be done. I'm thinking of the doctrine of necessity. What needs to be done versus what may be done. Once governments are sure of how intrusive some of the things they must do would be, we would expect that proportionality would be their guidance standard. The things that they do not need to resort to would not be resorted to. But in the current situation of fear, I'm afraid any check that you try to put will be read as you are a friend of the virus. So it is important that those who are given executive power exercise the power with this appreciation of proportionality. Don't do more than you need to do, because we are having to tell people who we have visited, who we have spoken with, where we've been, and all of that in the name of a public health emergency. It's unavoidable because we don't know enough about the virus. But I should hope that the more certain we are about the virus, or the closer we are to getting treatment, some of these more intrusive and more invasive aspects of the management of it would have to be looked at.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, I want to take your view on the...
That will be your last one.
All right, thank you, Chairman. I would like to know where you stand philosophically on the matter to do with the LGBTQI community. Our laws remain conservative. We remain a very conservative society. I recall Moses Fuamweni's group and the chief imam and religious leaders have reached out to political parties to make sure that in our manifestos for the 2020 campaign, that is expressly stated that we will protect the conservativeness of Ghana and not open our doors to LGBTQI. But others say it's a human rights issue and that we should give in and allow those who have that sexual orientation to legally express themselves accordingly. What is your view about LGBTQI? Do you think it's time for Ghana to open up to that?
I haven't seen anything in the public reaction to see that it's time for Ghana to, and you talked about Ghana being conservative. If that's the nature of the society, then conservative cannot be a pejorative word. So you may allow certain kinds of conduct, but you have to understand the sensitivities and the sensibilities of the majority. You need to protect minorities, but not at the expense of majorities. So I would say that in general terms, I would want to see the manifestation of that position before I say something definite in one way or the other. There are lots of things we would love to do. There are some people who are born naturally covetous, but we don't allow them to take everything they want to take. So we need to be guided by the specific situations, and then we can deal with them. But I would not use conservative in the way that you use it. It's not meant to be a pejorative word.
But any personal views, Mr. Chairman?
Honorable that was your last one.
Yes, but it's just for clarity. I didn't quite understand what her personal position is on the matter.
I have friends who are gay. I work a lot with people on the international circuit. It should not make a difference. I should not discriminate against them because of their choice. But I also don't approve of people ramming something down my throat because that's what they want. So we need to hold a balance.
Okay. No, let me give Jato before I come here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And let me also join hands in congratulating Professor Henrietta Mensah Bonsu. Thanks for the question. Prof, many hold the view that the CJ's administrative, judicial, and financial administration powers impede his judicial functions. Do you also agree with this assertion? And do you agree that we should decouple the administration function of the CJ from the judicial function?
The CJ wears many hats. He's both the head of the judiciary and also a justice of the Supreme Court. I don't know how it's going to be possible to give all his administrative duties to somebody else for him to concentrate on being a judge. It's a two-hearted situation, and it has to be managed that way because the head of the institution has to have financial control. It's only in this country that many people don't worry about where their money comes from as long as it comes. And when people are running an organization, they don't even know how, they leave everything to the accountant. No. The head has accountability for both operational and financial matters. So I wouldn't hold with the view that it's too big, it makes you too important. It is an important job.
Thank you very much. My next one has to do with the UNICEF report, which states that 21% of Ghanaian aged 5 to 17 years are engaged in child labor. And it went further to say that 14% are engaged in hazardous work. And they explained the hazardous work to be farming and fishing. In our cultural setting, Prof, where we need to follow our parents to farm and the like. And I must admit, it's even affecting the purchase of our cocoa beans. Do you hold the view that following your father or mother to farm during vacations and weekends constitute child labor? Also, learning a second trade constitute a child labor?
We should always understand that there's a difference between child socialization and child labor. Child labor tends to be harmful to the child's development. But if you are bringing up a child, the child must be socialized according to your culture and traditions. So you cannot be like some other people who hold other views. When you are growing up in my house, of course you will learn to cook. And you will learn to scrub if you go to Wesley Girls High School. Because you can't live in debt and you must eat. So socializing the child so that the child can function in your community is part of what it takes to make a Ghanaian. The extreme is when the child is so loaded with work that the child has no opportunity to go to school, or if the child is in school, to even do homework. That is troublesome. But I will not count that as child labor. But when you take them to break rocks and do all kinds of things that stop them from going to school. In class 6, I was in a school close to the beach around Kolebu. I had a classmate who never came to school on the days when the nets came in. He preferred to go to the beach, help drag the net, and get some free fish. You would find him definitely in school on Tuesdays because there would be no fishing. But other days, depending upon whether the net was coming in or not, that is troublesome because at a certain point in time, it will interfere with a child's education. But we need to grow up as Ghanaians. And until our lives are a little different, we must understand that some people are looking at these. If you look at somebody's culture with a foreigner's eyes, you are bound to see things that are not there. You are bound to think they are not very sensible because they are not like you. But you do not have the end all and be all of what it takes. So we must watch it so that it doesn't interfere with the child's development. It doesn't interfere with the child's growth. It doesn't interfere with the child's opportunities. But we can't raise children who don't know how to do anything. I visit an orphanage at Dodoa as part of my Lion Club's commitments to help the children. I was shocked to find that they don't have a garden, even though they have plenty of land, because they've been taught in school that's child labor. And I said, who taught you that? For you to even have a garden competition as to who can grow the best okra is child labor. Who taught you that? So we must understand that you are raising children in an orphanage to be dependent upon charity when they have plenty of land and could grow some of their food. You know, so we just need to understand that there's a difference between how we raise our children and how others raise their children. But we must be sure that the way we raise them don't take away their future.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Prof, I want to look at your social humanitarian services, all through, and taking up this appointment where you'll be deprived of your social contact with the general public, because generally judges don't mostly mingle with the general public. How do you balance the two?
Yes, I enjoy being a lion, but every time in its place. When I joined the UN, I was advised that I had to stand down my membership because my position was such that I was not to be seen favoring any particular group. And so I stood my membership down for the entire time I was there. I only took it back up when I came home. So every time and its place.